My God, we have so much to discuss. Get comfortable. And even though not all of it's good, some of it's very good though, like really good, but some of it's not. But still, the fact that we're so invested in this story from Stephen King and the films that Andy Muschietti has crafted, even if it's on a downward slope in terms of quality, but still, we're so invested, I think that speaks to the It story and film franchise in a good way. All right, so yes, welcome to my spoiler review of It Chapter 2. There are, as always, chapter times down below in the video description if there's something you want to talk about right now. But where I want to start is how freaking long this movie is. And what's weird about it is that even though it is 3 hours long, and boy do you feel it, hardly anything happens. Maybe that's one of the reasons you do feel it, right? But like, Andy Muschietti says there's a 6-hour supercut that exists, but I'm like, did you cut out all the story? And this is just like the in-between ambiance stuff, right? It's like really weird. I don't know what, there just seems to be so much that's missing, even though there's a 3-hour runtime. Now, the best scene by far is the Chinese restaurant, not just because it's a great scene, both as it's originally constructed and also the way it's done here. But it's early enough in the movie that you're like, this is where it gets good. You get really excited. You think, okay, slow start, but we're starting to pick up momentum. But unfortunately, the movie never is as good as it is in that scene. That scene is just, and I'll actually call it a sequence, because I loved even the stuff that happened afterwards in the parking lot outside when they were all like, I'm going home, man, right? Now I'm starting to really remember. That stuff was great. I really liked it. And one of the things I like the most about it is that it's really the only scene in the movie where the Losers Club as adults interacts. They spend so much of the movie separated, which I think is a mistake. But here they're together, they're interacting, it's fantastic. And you see that spark of chemistry that is throughout the first film with the younger cast. But here you see that spark of it. Although you do see a spark in Bill Hader's eyes for the entire movie. He's so good! We're going to talk about him in 2 segments, in fact. He's great. I really hope that this is, Barry is certainly helping his career, but I hope he really blows up thanks to this movie. He deserves to. But basically, the Chinese restaurant scene is this whole movie in a fortune cookie, right? Now, speaking of fortune cookies, instead of walnut shell or nutshell, fortune cookies, I was impressed with how they upped the ante with each fortune cookie in that scene. Like when first something like an eye or something came out of the first one, you're like, well, that's so disgusting. But then they kept topping themselves. For some reason, what really stuck with me the most of all the fortune cookies was the bat wing, right? Because I didn't expect a wing to come out of there, and it was so big. I was like, no way! It was those fortune cookies were like Mary Poppins's handbag. These things were able to fit in there that were so much bigger, but they sold it. It was just because it's a horrifying illusion, so it doesn't have to make sense physics wise. But it really made an impression on me. The bat wing, when it stretched out, I was like, that's disgusting, but I can't look away. I also liked all the floating heads in the fish tank behind them. It was great. And then that perfect moment, of course, when the hostess comes in to see what all the screaming is about, and they realize that, yes, it is just an illusion, and it looks like they're just trashing the private room at the restaurant. That was great. And I loved when Bill Hader yelled at that little kid. That kid was a good callback throughout the movie, but I was disappointed with the funhouse scene, which we'll talk about under the Pennywise section, so I thought that there was no payoff to that scene with the kid. It was just like a good idea. It was like a whisper of an idea that the movie never really fully had any follow through on. But I sure loved that Chinese restaurant scene. It was just absolutely fantastic. But on that note, now everybody is familiar with that scene if you've read the book. Or I haven't read the book, but if you've seen the miniseries. I've seen the miniseries. I actually just recently rewatched it about a year ago, right before the first movie came out, to refamiliarize myself with the material. And if you haven't read the book or seen the miniseries, then I feel sorry for you, because you're going to have a hard time following this movie, because so much of it is poorly or not at all explained. Like, there's so much that I'm like, if you weren't familiar with, again, the book or the miniseries, would you know what was going on? I mean, it's like, I feel like a Harry Potter fan who's watching the movies, right? Because, like, I watched the Harry Potter movies without reading any of the books, and I was like, this makes no sense. And Harry Potter fans, you know, you'd always see them online being like, oh, well, this just touches on that, and that is like a reference to this, which actually fully explains it if you've read the books. And I would say that this is a similar situation. For instance, they don't really fully explain that everyone has amnesia after leaving the town. Like, it's there. That's one of the things that's the most there. But it's not there like it was in the book or the mini. Well, I'm assuming the book, but like it was in the miniseries. Like, it's just like a line in the script. They're like, oh yeah, I don't remember. And then they just move on. And you're like, what? I mean, they could have done it better. They really could have done a better job with it. Also, they didn't do a good job, I think, showcasing that all of the Losers Club who left Derry became very, very successful. That was an interesting wrinkle in, again, the original story. But here, and like even with Beverly, they don't even talk about her career. And we'll talk about that a little bit under her category. But this stuff should have really all been driven home, I think, much stronger. There's also a lot of other stuff that's left out. We'll talk about Bill's bike. That's like totally not a thing. Bill's wife, who is a major character in the original story and in the miniseries, she has one quick scene here, and that's it. And they just totally do away with her. And you're like, that's important. Why? And they like, here's the thing. They took out so much of the story, and it's still 3 hours, and I don't know what they took it out for. Like, if you were to ask me, like, oh, well, they took it out so that they could tell it this way, or they made a change, or they put this in instead, or so they could focus more on this. And I'm like, I mean, I don't remember after having left the movie theater, right? It's weird. Now, also, it's supposed to be 27 years later, of course. This happens every 27 years. Never explained. We'll get to that. But Pennywise, of course, is supposed to return, and it's supposed to start all up again with kids being killed again. And they did a good job driving that home in the miniseries by starting off the adult section with another child murder. And you see it, or you see like a little bit like the Georgie thing all over again. And they have a Georgie-like thing here too. But here, of course, they have the Adrian Mellon thing, and that's very good. I wouldn't get rid of that. But the new child murders, because Pennywise is supposed to only kill children, so they actually never really do a good job of explaining why he deviates and kills Adrian Mellon, right? So, like in the first movie, there's this sense of dread, like what's happening to all the children in town? Why are they all being killed? That's never here. It seems like there's no one in town. I don't like when the Losers Club is walking around through empty streets. This is just like really early in the morning. I mean, I know that, you know, like a lot of small towns in America, it's run into hard times, but it's not abandoned. It's not Derry isn't an abandoned town. So it was weird that sometimes there'd be people around and sometimes there'd be just absolutely no one around. I was like, what happened here? I mean, as I said in my non-spoiler review, it felt like the movie couldn't afford extras, but the first It made so much money, and this is such a big franchise now for Warner Brothers, you think they could afford extras and like some secondary characters. It was really weird. And and they never made it clear that maybe it was Pennywise's doing to make them feel like they were all alone. It just seemed like the movie again was cheap and like taking a shortcut. It was frustrating. And on that note, in many points, the script feels like more like fan fiction, and that things happen just because screenwriter Gary Doberman wants or needs them to. He's like, because I said so. And it's not an organic script whatsoever. And you really feel that in this second chapter. And I think that's why it's only the really searing stuff that cuts through, like the Adrian Mellon attack. Now, again, this scene also isn't particularly organic. It's a little clumsy in the setup, but the acting is so strong, and I want to make sure I get everyone's name right here. Xavier Dolan is Adrian, because it's a lot of new actors we're not familiar with, but he's fabulous. Taylor Frey is his boyfriend. You could really feel the love between them, and they didn't have a lot of time to establish it. They were such nice guys, the way they, gave their prize to that little girl, who of course, ended up being a victim as well. But I think they thanks to the acting, they established them very quickly as this really wonderful couple. But then also the acting of the townies who viciously attacked them was also good. They did a good job selling this despicable anger and hate. Jake Weary, Eric Junola, and Connor Smith. I mean, talk about a role, like, wow, having to bring that to life. Wow. And the scene itself is filmed so unflinchingly, and it's extremely unsettling and tragic. But I think what also really underscores it and drives it home is that today there's so much of this real hate in the world. Like, you know, it's almost like seeing the internet hate that is now unfortunately a part of our lives every day, but it becomes a reality right in front of you, and with real world consequences. And it's just terrifying, and so, again, so tragic, and just genuinely just so sad. It's wow. It's very well done. But this scene is strongly balanced out. The opening, it's strongly balanced by one of the losers later on being revealed to be gay. But it's not Eddie, who has been implied as being gay in past versions of this story. Instead, it's Hader's Richie, who's gay. That was an incredible surprise, and I love the way this whole thing was handled. It's my favorite part of the movie because it's perfect. Because Hader's Richie isn't defined by being gay, and once it's revealed that he is gay, it doesn't change the character whatsoever, but it just adds another layer to him. It's just really, really beautiful. Furthermore, I kept waiting for him to reveal to the rest of the Losers Club that he was gay. And I got a little nervous that he was going to do it at the end when they were all in the lake after they defeated it. And I thought maybe he'd do it as a joke to break the tension. And I was like, this is going to seem really not appropriate, and this will be a bad way to end this storyline. But I can't believe the movie had the guts to not have him reveal to his friends that he was gay, at least at this point. I thought that was really sophisticated because what he does is he goes by himself to a bridge in Derry where as a child he carved his own initial and that of another boy he kind of had a little bit of a flirtation with. And just Bill Hader's look on his face, you can see that he's only just starting himself on this personal journey of acceptance. And that sure, he'll get to the point where he can tell everyone, but this is just the first step. And again, it was really beautiful and so sophisticated, and I just think it's a huge win for the LGBT community that I'd say that Bill Hader's character is the lead of the movie. I mean, because I think he stands out the most. But that character is a gay character in the movie. And it's not just the comic relief. He also has the best dramatic moments. And again, as I said, it's a great depiction because it doesn't change the character. It's just a different layer. And it's like a little bit like what Harvey Milk said when he was running his campaign. He said, you have to get people to stop thinking as the LGBT community as the other. Instead, you have to show them that it's people that are already in their lives that they already know and love. And I thought this was a great example of that. I loved it. I would love to actually continue to see Bill Hader's Richie maybe in another horrifying adventure. He was great. I loved it, and I think this movie should be really proud of what it's accomplished here, even if it doesn't do a lot of other good stuff and make that such a bad job with all the other characters. All right, I liked Eddie. But I also think Finn Wolfhard could have done a good job with this himself if he'd been given the opportunity to explore it as younger Richie. But the original cast is ridiculously underused here. But I don't think it's their fault. I think it's because they just simply grew up too damn fast. And I think the movie probably couldn't afford to de-age them in all the scenes that they shot. Couldn't afford it, and it wouldn't be worth it. It would just be wasting the money because they were not able to de-age them successfully where they did it. I mean, Richie's face looks like melted wax in the flashback sequences. It's just so obviously distorted by a computer. It's shocking, especially what they can accomplish. If you can stick Jim Carrey's face on Allison Brie's body convincingly in like an internet video, how can't you de-age these actors? Maybe they were rushed. I don't know. It was weird, but it looked real bad. But I can see them wanting to use them a little bit at least because their chemistry truly is something special. And they still got it. And it was great to see it even just a little bit. Like when they had my favorite scene was in the underground clubhouse when they had the shower caps to protect from spiders. And Richie's like, I'm not wearing that. And then they cut to everybody else and put theirs on already. I would put mine on. I don't like spiders. So I think that was just hilarious. I liked that quite a bit. And I think that but by having them in the movie, it just showed how the adult cast, for the most part, just did not have that same spark of chemistry, except for the Chinese restaurant scene. They had it there. Okay, now we're going to go through the characters, but I want to start with Pennywise. I'll do everybody else in the order of my favorite, but I want to go with Pennywise first because we couldn't really talk about him in the non-spoiler review for obvious reasons. All right, so as I said, though, in the non-spoiler review, the character, spends so little time as Pennywise in Chapter 2 that Billy Skarsgård doesn't get much to do, which is a real shame, but he does deliver the character's best scene. And so I'm going to go through his different incarnations and scenes in the order of my favorite. That's something I'm going to do in the order of my favorite as well. All right, so my favorite scene was Under the Bleachers. It reminded me of the brilliance of the Georgie sewer scene from the first film. Billy Skarsgård did a great job there too. And that Pennywise is like fishing for kids, but he's clumsy at it and not very good. And I loved it when the little girl called him out on it. She's like, that makes no sense. And I like the look on his face where he was like, oh, you got me there. It made me laugh out loud when I saw it in the movie theater. I was like, it was just so hilarious. And Billy Skarsgård, I think, is truly very talented, and I love what he does with this character. And I'm disappointed he didn't get more screen time here. But it was just fabulous. And the way he rebounded, too, and came up with a reason to get her to still come into the darkness with him. Or to the light, I guess, more accurately. But that was great. I felt so bad for that little girl. She was adorable. She did a good job with her half of the scene, too. That was great. Then, when he was Stanley. I mean, in the first movie, when it came out of the fridge, which was one of my favorite scenes in that film, everybody, of course, remembers it, which is why I guess they did the callback here. But here, when the refrigerator door opens, it's young Stanley's head on giant bug legs, and it's just so incredibly disturbing. Although, in large part, because adult Stanley has killed himself at the beginning of the movie, but also Wyatt Olaf really sells Stanley's facial expressions during this scene. It's just, again, so disturbing. It's a bug with Stanley's head scurrying across the floor. Ew, it was inspired. Then next, the old woman. Now, we saw a lot of this scene in the trailer, the teaser trailer, but what they held back when she finally attacks Beverly, hello! They did such a good job with this naked, twisted, giant old woman that I was really impressed. I did not expect that when they cut to the other half of the scene when she charged Beverly. I thought it would just be like, the naked old woman, and I thought maybe they would, not have her actually be naked. But it was like, wow. And the visual effects team did a very good job here. Maybe this is where they spent all their time and money. But it was amazing. And it was good and scary, but not so scary that you had to look away, which is actually how I would describe most of this movie. All right, then next, Beverly's hair. When it was running after young Ben as young Beverly with her, not just her hair on fire, but it ended up being her whole head. I really thought that was cool. I mean, it was a hilarious, twisted take on the poem, of course, that he'd written her. Your hair is winter fire, January embers, right? But it's just mesmerizing to watch. And that's when I think this character, It, is at its best when it's doing performance art. I mean, I think It could also have a side career as a modern artist. I think he does really good work. Then my least favorite scene for him was actually the funhouse, because they showed almost the entire thing in the trailer, and unlike the Beverly scene, they didn't save anything for the movie. So you basically saw it. And I think the ending, although I did look away because it was so terrifying and I felt so bad for that kid. So maybe something really cool happened, but I think he just chomped on him and there was a blood spurt. And you were like, it wasn't as good as the Beverly thing. Then there's the Pennywise mythology, right? He's an alien. He's made up of orange lights. He only eats kids, but only every 27 years. Who cares? It doesn't make any sense. It's never made any sense, but they spend so much time on it. But because it doesn't make any sense, that is wasted, boring time. I mean, there's so many other things that they could have done with that time. And also, it forces Pennywise to spend most of his time as a half bug. It's the top half is Bill Skarsgård, but then the bottom half is these giant bug legs. And you're just like, why? And it's never explained. I mean, I don't see why he couldn't have just been a demon clown and we could have focused more on the situation with the Losers Club, young and adult, and all that psychological stuff. That's where the story's interesting. I mean, I think things are scarier the less they're explained. Not when you're like, oh, so you actually don't have an explanation. All right. So let's talk about now everything else in the movie, the characters in order of my favorite. And you know who's my favorite? Stephen King. He's so great. He has this fantastic cameo as a pawn shop owner who sells Bill back his bike. And it would have been a really much even better scene if that bike had gone on to mean something like it did in the first movie. But instead, in the miniseries. So instead, it's in the book. So instead, it's just a gag where it falls apart because it's so old, and then Bill just is like, oh well, and then walks away. And you're like, what's happening? But it's still a great scene with Stephen King. I like that it's a Stanley style cameo. I like giving the on-screen like visual credit to the people who crafted these stories. I think it's a good trend in Hollywood. I really like it. I think there should be more cameos like this from original creators. It's so much fun, and I love spotting them. Andy Muschietti shows up. He's a customer in the drugstore as well. And for instance, I like that Chad Stahelski was in John Wick 3 for just a second. These guys should have a little bit bigger cameos. Maybe not the level of Stephen King, but bigger cameos. Alfred Hitchcock, of course, being one of the most famous people to do this. But Stephen King, it turns out, is a really good actor. I don't know if I'm not saying he's an Oscar-winning actor, but he's like really good. He really did a great job with the scene. And I think it's because he was having fun with it, because they had him play the other side of celebrity interactions, negative celebrity interactions. Like, for instance, when he jacks up the price on Bill on the bike because he recognizes him as a celebrity author, and he's like, what, you can afford it? I just loved it. It was a really great scene, and it remains that and Bill Hader are the two reasons to see this movie. So let's go to Bill Hader. Now, I love the first you see him, he actually throws up towards the screen. I had to look away at that too. It was too gross. But then I like the change that he was a comedian filming like a Netflix special. You know, he walked out on stage like you see so many comedians, like it's popular to have the camera behind the comedian as they walk out on stage to greet the audience. And they did that here. It was very relatable. It seemed very modern. And often, you know, Bill Hader's Richie has the reaction that the audience is thinking, just like the younger Richie. And I think that also makes the character very relatable. And he has so many great jokes in the movie. Really good, really well. They're well written, but they're very well delivered. But then he has so much great drama. And on that note, a lot of times I think when we think of Bill Hader, we're like, why isn't he doing as well as Will Ferrell, right? Because they were on SNL around the same time. But seeing Bill Hader here and his work on Barry, if you're not watching Barry, you're making a huge mistake. But I actually think Bill Hader might be the new Jim Carrey, and that he's very funny, but he's actually very good at the dramatic stuff too. I mean, he made me laugh, and he also broke my heart. I mean, the whole stuff with Eddie in the third act. I know some of you, apparently there's a shipping between the two of them. I'd never heard of that until just a few days ago. They just seem like really good friends to me. And that's another important thing about Bill Hader's Richie being gay. He wasn't like, he and Eddie were just friends. I didn't pick up, I mean, it's fine if you want to ship them, but I know some of you are like, oh, pretty hypocritical since you're such a big Stucky person. I see a spark. There has been a spark between Steve and Bucky. But I saw no spark in a romantic kind between Eddie and Richie. They just seemed like really good friends. And I liked that. I thought that this was so good, the way that when they were running around in the cave, and, you know, the stuff with the 3 doors, that was my favorite stuff down there because of their acting. And then also when Eddie died and, you know, Bill Hader's Richie didn't want to leave him there. I get a little teary-eyed just thinking about it, and the fact that his friend's body would never be recovered and given a good burial. They didn't have to say any of that. I got that from Bill Hader's acting. It's a shot from the trailer, and it caught my eye even in the trailer. But it's so visceral, emotionally and visually. It just really stuck with me. I thought that stuff was beautiful. All right, so next I have to go with James Ransone. He was great as Eddie. I mean, I loved it when Richie's like trying to get his self-confidence up, and he's like, who married a woman 3 times his body weight? I thought that was great. Now, at first, I thought, like, when he was in the car, I thought he was just going to be a cheap imitation of Jack Dylan Grazer throughout the movie. I was not impressed. But he ultimately made the role his own thanks to some great scenes. Now, one of them is actually between him and Jack Dylan Grazer because it cuts back and forth in time, and that's where he had a situation at the drugstore when he goes downstairs. That was terrifying. And his mother's there, tied up. And I love the fact that he left his mom. He's like, sorry, Mom, I'm not going to be able to untie you in time. I got to save myself. I thought that was incredible. So that was very good. And then I also loved when Henry Bowers attacked him at the hotel in the bathroom, and he stabbed him right through the cheek. I was as shocked as Eddie was. But then I loved that he ran into the shower and then he stabbed him through the shower curtain. That was really great as well. That was great stuff. And then again, I thought that James Ransone did a great job with that stuff with, again, Richie at the end, you know, with the running around in the cave and his death. I mean, he was the other half of that, and that's why it was so successful. And then I got to go with Teach Grant as Henry Bowers, adult Henry Bowers. As I said in my non-spoiler review, it was really not used enough that Henry Bowers was a real threat mixed in with Pennywise's illusions, because you didn't know it was real. Like both Eddie in the hotel and Mike in the library, their reactions, their defense of themselves was delayed because at first they just thought it was another illusion. And I thought that made it even more terrifying. Like when I was watching, I was like, it's real, do something. So that was great. And I wish they had done more with that. Still, I think Teach Grant does a great job, even though, again, he looks so much like Seth MacFarlane. And I thought it was interesting, even though pointless, that he was being driven around by zombie Hofstetter. At least, it had some more, a gruesomeness in a movie that's missing some, a lot of scary moments. Then Jessica Chastain. Now, she's, I think, a little too self-aware in this movie, and she has like a wall up, it's not like Sophia Lillis in the first movie, and here, when she's on screen, is very open and unassuming, right? But here, it's always Jessica Chastain is Beverly, not Beverly. It's Jessica Chastain is playing the character. Jessica Chastain is in It Chapter 2. But I wouldn't say that's entirely her fault as an actress. I think it's the role is so underwritten that that's all that's there. Jessica Chastain's stardom. And I think she's arguably, along with, obviously, James McAvoy, he's underwritten. And I think Bill Hader is able to disappear into the role because he does such a good acting job. And he's given much more to do. Jessica Chastain doesn't have that really rich storyline that she gets to deal with. Maybe a lot of hers on the cutting room floor, which is weird because she and Andy Muschietti are friends. You think he'd treat her right. But it boggles my mind, for instance, that the love triangle was like a huge part of the first movie, but it's totally abandoned here. I mean, she and Bill kiss once, but it comes out of nowhere. You're like, why are you kissing right now? And then they never revisit it again. They never talk about kissing. No one else ever talks about it. I think someone saw it at the very end. They're like, oh yeah, we have a love triangle. They better kiss. Okay, we're done. It was weird. And I thought it didn't make sense when she ended up with Ben, of course, as she's supposed to. She was like, oh, that poem was you? Even though we've had no other connections, I'm just going to stay with you anyway. And I guess because he's supposed to be like super rich. It seemed very shallow, and they should have connected in this movie to make, Ben and Beverly. It was just ridiculous. Now also, she has an abusive relationship with her husband, which is important because, of course, she had that same situation with her father, right? But there's no time spent on the career that she's supposed to have, the very successful career she's supposed to have as a fashion designer, right? They could have changed it to something else. Just who is she beyond her relationship with guys? Which, of course, is a problem for that character. That was explored in the first movie. And it would have been fine if it had been explored here too. But they didn't explore it at all. It's just that's what the situation was. It's like the movie, instead of being commentary on that, was part of the problem. All right, so then, Beverly, wonderful character in the first movie, and just totally, sidelined here. And, Jessica Chastain, unfortunately, I don't think it's her fault whatsoever. All right, so James McAvoy. I liked the Hollywood stuff. I love Hollywood stuff because we love talking about movies, right? So I liked when he was on set. I loved the Peter Bogdanovich cameo when he dropped out like Cecil B. DeMille on the crane. And he dropped in and he was like, you got to change the ending. That was great. I loved all that. I wish that there had been maybe a little bit more. Like they were like, he's a famous Hollywood screenwriter. And then they're like, well, we're never going to talk about it again. So it's like, it's kind of weird. But so then he just becomes Bill. So Bill is supposed to be the leader of this group, right? But he doesn't do any leading here, which I thought was very weird. He goes from being the male lead of the first movie to having very little screen time and development here. But there was one development which I had a huge problem with. All right, so it's revealed that Bill's dark secret is that he wasn't actually sick that day when Georgie wanted to play. He didn't feel like playing with Georgie, so he pretended to be sick and sent his brother out in the rain to play alone. That's a pretty bad secret. He should feel very bad about that. But my problem is that it came out of nowhere. I never saw that layer in the first scene. It's not like I look back at it and I go, oh yeah, he is pretending. It's not there. And then you think in the first movie he would have confessed it to somebody, or at least he would have confessed it when Georgie sees Georgie in the basement. It never comes up. It feels like it's just tacked on here for some big emotional reveal about Bill. And instead, because it feels tacked on, it's just the final nail in the coffin for the character. So I had a big problem with how Bill was handled here. Then, Isaiah Mustafa. If you're going to be crazy, you got to then be effective. And unfortunately, Isaiah Mustafa's character, Mike, is not. The Native American ritual, it didn't work, right? Like, it didn't work. But he also lied to everyone about the fact that it was supposed to kill them. Like, when your character keeps getting called out by the other characters for being weird and not trustworthy, you're not a good character. Like, Bill's like, did you drug me? And then Richie's like, did you try and get us all killed? And then I don't think Mike ever had any great moments. And I thought Isaiah Mustafa did a good job. I thought he was very likable in the role. I think he did a good acting job. But just like with Beverly, he just was not given anything to do. All right, then last is Jay Ryan, who was just horrible. Dead space in the movie. Underwritten character as well, but Jay Ryan added nothing, right? Like Jeremy Ray Taylor did a great job selling his unrequited love for Beverly and continues to do so in this movie in the flashback scenes that they have. But here, I guess Jay Ryan has never experienced unrequited love and isn't a good enough actor to pretend. And I think that's what really was it. I never once believed that Jay Ryan was at some point in his life Jeremy Ray Taylor, physically or emotionally. It just was like some guy just stepped in, was a placeholder. It was really bad. Then Andy Bean. All right, so I guess not last. So Andy Bean as Stanley, adult Stanley. Now, if you've seen Swamp Thing, I stopped watching because they discontinued the show, but I saw the first few episodes. And when Andy Bean was playing Alec, and he's amazing. Like, talk about smolder. This guy was on fire. So sexy, so intriguing, so great in Swamp Thing. So it's kind of sad to see how little he's used here. Also, the suicide scene was much more effective in the miniseries. I felt here it was a little wasted. But here, my big problem was the letter that he writes at the end of the movie, when he tells all of his friends, don't feel bad, that he killed himself because he knew it would save all of them, that he was actually doing something very heroic. And I feel that's a really dangerous thing to legitimize, a way of thinking for anyone who might be in danger of committing suicide. Tragically, a lot of people do have the misconception that if they were to kill themselves, it would make things better for other people, loved ones, just in general. And of course, that's not true. Everyone is valuable. Nobody should have that horrible feeling and feel they need to do that to themselves. So I think it was very irresponsible of the movie to provide an example of where that is the case. Even if it is fictional, even if it's fighting a giant monster, alien monster, there's no circumstance where taking a life, someone else's or your own, is anything but a horrible tragedy. So putting the heroic spin on Stanley's suicide, I felt was an odd and irresponsible take. It Chapter 2 has some great moments. Part of me wonders indeed what was left on the cutting room floor. And I'm conflicted. Andy Muschietti says he'd like to release eventually a 6-hour cut of the movie, but I'm like, do I trust him and Gary Doberman enough to sit through, again, double the time of this movie? Part of me says no, but also, as you can see from the discussion we just had, we're so emotionally invested in the story, maybe I would want to see what else was there. I'd certainly like to see some more Bill Hader and James Ransone. I'd love to see if there was more Billy Skarsgård. Maybe Jessica Chastain did have some great scenes. So yeah, I guess I would watch the 6-hour cut. And maybe there's a better cut of this movie out of that 6 hours than the one that was assembled here. All right, so what did you think of it, Chapter 2? This is the spoiler review, so you can go to town in the comments down below. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.